Listen carefully, because this isn't the kind of speech you hear. This is the kind you feel in your chest long after it ends. There's a dangerous misconception about empaths. People think empaths are weak, soft, easy to manipulate, easy to break. And that is where they made their biggest mistake. Because what they don't understand is that an empath isn't fragile. An empath is aware. They read energy the way others read words. They sense lies before they're spoken. They feel intentions before. Where actions happen, and yet they still choose kindness. That's not weakness. That's discipline. But here's the turning point, the moment everything changes. When an empath is pushed too far, they don't shatter, they transform. You see, empaths give chances, more than most people deserve. They forgive, they understand, they try to see the pain in others even when they're the ones being hurt. But every betrayal leaves a mark. Every lie rewires something inside them. Every manipulation sharpens their awareness, until one day they stop explaining, they stop chasing, they stop caring the way they used to. And when that switch flips, it doesn't go back. They broke the wrong empathy, because the version of you they met was the kind one, the patient one, the forgiving one. But the version they created, that one sees everything. No more blind trust. No more emotional discounts for bad behavior. No more sacrificing your peace just to keep others comfortable. Now you recognize patterns instantly. Now you notice the small shifts in tone, the hidden motives, the subtle disrespect. Now you move differently. Empathy was never your weakness. It was your awareness operating at a level most people can't even comprehend. While others walk into a room and see faces, you feel tensions, you sense histories, you detect fractures in people that haven't even been spoken out loud yet. You notice the hesitation before someone lies. You feel the shift in energy before someone betrays. That's where catch the micro changes in tone, posture, breathing, the things most people miss because they're too distracted trying to be understood instead of understanding. And here's the part that confuses people about you. You don't just see darkness in others, you understand it. You see the wounds behind the behavior. You recognize the pain driving the manipulation. You identify the insecurity hiding behind arrogance. And instead of exploiting it, you choose compassion. That choice right there, that's not softness, that's control, because it's easy to become cold. It's easy to shut down. It's easy to mirror cruelty with cruelty and call it strength. But it takes a different kind of power to see exactly what someone is and still choose not to become it. People think you didn't notice. They think you were too kind to see what they were doing, too patient to catch their games, too forgiving to recognize their patterns. That assumption gave them confidence. Confidence to push boundaries. That's where confidence to test limits. Confidence to believe they were smarter than you. But you were never blind. You were observing, collecting, analyzing. Not reacting doesn't mean not knowing. Silence doesn't mean ignorance. Calm doesn't mean weakness. It means you were in control of yourself while they were losing control of who they really were. You let people reveal themselves. Not because you had no choice, but because you were gathering truth. Every inconsistency, every contradiction, every moment. Their words didn't match their energy. You saw it, you stored it, you understood it, and still, you gave them space. That's the discipline nobody talks about. Because most people don't have the capacity to hold awareness without immediately acting on it. They react too fast. They judge too quickly. They escalate too easily. But you absorb first. You process first. You understand before you decide. And that ability, that restraint, that patience, it makes you dangerous in a way that loud. But people will never be, because loud people reveal themselves quickly. But aware people, they move in silence. They don't need attention. They don't need validation. They don't need to prove they're right. They already know. And knowing without reacting, that's power. Because reaction gives people information. Reaction shows your triggers. Reaction exposes your limits. But when you stay composed, when you stay centered, when you stay aware without giving anything away, you become unpredictable. We're unreadable, untouchable. That's why manipulators get uncomfortable around you. They can't figure out where they stand. They can't locate your weaknesses. They can't predict your next move because you're not playing the same game. They're operating on surface level tactics. You're operating on depth. They're chasing control. You're mastering self-control. And self-control will always outlast manipulation because manipulation depends on emotional reactions. But when someone controls where emotions Manipulation has nowhere to attach. That's what they underestimated about you. They thought your kindness was compliance. They thought your patience was permission. They thought your silence was surrender. But it was none of those things. It was awareness choosing timing, because real strength isn't an immediate reaction. It's in precise response. And you respond when it matters, not when you're provoked. You don't give energy to every situation. You don't invest emotion in every person. You don't fight every battle. You choose. And choice is power. Because the moment you realize you don't have to engage, you become free. Free from their expectations. Free from their manipulation. Free from their need to control how you feel. And that's when the shift happens. When they realize you're not reacting the way they expected. When they notice their tactics aren't working. When they feel your energy pull back, your attention withdraw, your presence becomes selective. That's where confusion sets in, because they built their strategy on the assumption that you were weak. But now they're facing someone who is aware of patterns, aware of intentions, aware of value. And once awareness reaches that level, it doesn't go backwards. You don't unsee what you've seen. You don't know what you've understood. You don't return to a version of yourself that tolerated what you now recognize. And that's what makes empathy powerful. Not the feeling, the control behind the feeling. Not the understanding, the discipline in how you use that understanding. Not the awareness, the restraint in how you express it. Because anyone can feel. But not everyone can feel deeply, understand clearly, and still remain in control of themselves. That's rare. That's precise. That's powerful. Pain didn't arrive to destroy you. It arrived to expose what you were capable of becoming. Every betrayal you went through wasn't random. Every lie you uncovered wasn't accidental. Every moment you felt that were used, drained, overlooked, it was shaping something deeper inside you. Because pain has a purpose most people never understand. It reveals patterns. It forces awareness. It strips illusions. At first, it feels like loss, like something is being taken from you. Trust, peace, innocence, the ability to see people the same way you used to. And that part is real. Something is being taken, but something else is being built at the exact same time. Something sharper, something more precise, something that doesn't just feel, but understands. You didn't just experience pain, you studied it, you analyzed it. You felt it from every angle until you could recognize it instantly. And that changed you. Not into someone broken, but into someone calibrated. Because once you've been lied to enough times, you start noticing inconsistencies faster than others can hide them. Once you've been manipulated, you begin to recognize intention before it turns into action. Once you've been betrayed, you stop. That's where taking words at face value and start reading behavior as the real language. Pain trained you. It sharpened your instincts. It upgraded your perception. And that's the part people don't expect. They think pain weakens you. They think it leaves you fragile. They think it turns you into someone easier to control. But the opposite happens when you refuse to stay unconscious. You become harder to deceive, harder to influence, harder to reach in the same careless ways. Because now, you don't just listen to what people say. You observe what they do. You measure consistency. You track patterns. You notice the gap between intention and execution. And once you see that gap, you can't ignore it. That awareness creates distance. Not emotional coldness, but clarity. You stop attaching to potential. You stop believing in promises without proof. You stop investing in people who haven't earned access to your energy. That's not bitterness. That's precision. Because pain taught you something valuable. Not everyone deserves the same version of you. Not everyone deserves your time. Not everyone deserves your empathy at full capacity. And once you understand that, everything shifts. Your standards rise. Your tolerance lowers. Your circle becomes smaller, but stronger. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing people who benefit from your absence more than your presence. You stop fighting battles that only drain you without building you. And that shift, it's quiet, but it's powerful. Because from the outside, it looks like you changed. But from the inside, you finally aligned. Aligned with truth. Aligned with awareness. Aligned with self-respect. Pain forced you into that alignment. It didn't give you a choice. It pushed you to a point where staying the same became more uncomfortable than evolving. And that's where transformation begins. Not in comfort, not in ease, but in pressure. In moments where you realize you can't keep reacting the same way and expect different outcomes. You had to adapt. You had to grow. You had to become someone who doesn't just feel deeply, but protects that depth with intelligence. Because feeling deeply without boundaries is self-destruction. But feeling deeply with awareness, that's power. That's control. That's evolution. And evolution always comes with loss. You lost the version of you that tolerated too much. You lost the version of you that ignored red flags. You lost the version of you that gave endlessly without measuring return. And even though that loss hurt, it made space for something stronger, something more refined, something that doesn't break under pressure, but adjusts to it. Now when pressure comes, you don't collapse. You analyze. You adapt. You respond with intention instead of impulse. That's what pain built inside you. A system. A filter. A level of awareness that most people never reach because they avoid discomfort at all costs. But you didn't avoid it. You went through it. And going through it changed your relationship with it. You stopped fearing it. You started understanding it. And once you understand something, it loses its control over you. That's why the same things that used to hurt you don't hit the same anymore. Not because you don't feel, but because you see. You see what's behind the behavior. You see what's driving the action. You see what's real and what's performance. And that vision protects you. It keeps you from repeating. That's where cycles. It keeps you from giving the same energy to the same types of people. It keeps you moving forward instead of circling back. That's transformation. Not becoming someone else, but becoming more of who you were meant to be without illusions, without distractions, without unnecessary attachments. And once that transformation happens, it's permanent. You don't go back to being unaware. You don't go back to ignoring what you now recognize. You don't go back to giving without understanding that's where cost, because now you know the cost, and that knowledge changes everything. The most misunderstood form of power isn't loud, isn't aggressive, isn't visible, it's distance. Not the kind of distance that comes from anger, but the kind that comes from clarity. Because when you finally understand people, truly understand them, something inside you shifts. You stop reacting the way they expect. You stop engaging the way they rely on. You stop feeding the dynamic that once gave them access to you. And that silence, that absence, it hits harder than any argument ever could. People are prepared for confrontation. They rehearse responses. They justify their actions. They defend, deflect, manipulate. But they are not prepared for disconnection. They are not prepared for someone who sees everything and chooses nothing. No explanation, no closure, no emotional performance. Just a quiet withdrawal that says more than words ever could. Because when you detach, you remove the very thing they depended on. Your attention, your energy, your reactions. And without those, their influence disappears. That's why emotional detachment isn't cold, it's controlled. It's not about shutting down your feelings, it's about deciding where they're allowed to exist. It's about recognizing that not every situation deserves your emotional investment. Not every person deserves your response. Not every action deserves your reaction. And once you operate from that level, everything becomes intentional. You don't respond out of habit. You don't react out of impulse. You choose. And that choice creates a kind of power most people will never experience, because most people are reactive. They get pulled into conversations they don't need to have. They get triggered by words that don't deserve attention. They get emotionally entangled in situations that only drain them. But you don't. Not anymore. Because you've learned that reaction is a form of permission. Every time you react, you give someone where access to your state. You allow them to influence your emotions. You hand them control without realizing it. And once you see that, you start protecting your reactions like they matter. Because they do. Your reactions are signals. They tell people what affects you. They reveal what you value. They expose where you're vulnerable. And when those signals are controlled, your vulnerabilities become hidden. That's where detachment becomes strategic. Not as a defense, but as a standard. You don't withdraw because you're hurt. You withdraw because you're aware. Aware of patterns that don't align with your peace. Aware of behavior that doesn't match your standards. Aware of people who only show up when it benefits them. And awareness always leads to distance. Because once you see clearly, you can't stay blindly connected. That's the shift people don't understand. They think you changed. They think you became distant, cold, different. But the truth is, you became selective. You stopped giving unlimited access to people who never respected it. You stopped explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand. You stopped proving your worth to people committed to undervaluing you. And that decision, It cuts deeper than any words you could have said. Because words can be argued. Words can be twisted. Words can be ignored. But absence cannot be negotiated. Absence forces reflection. It creates a space where people are left with nothing but their own actions too. That's where confront, no distractions, no justifications, no emotional reactions to hide behind, just silence and the truth that comes with it. And for someone who relied on your presence, your energy, your attention, that silence becomes loud. It becomes uncomfortable. It becomes something they can't control because they were used to access, used to your availability, used to your willingness to engage. And now that access is gone. Not reduced, not limited. Gone. And that's where the real power shows. Where itself, not in what you say, but in what you refuse to entertain. Not in how you react, but in how you remain unaffected. Not in how you confront, but in how you disengage. Because disengagement is the ultimate boundary. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't require understanding. It doesn't require permission. It simply exists. And once it's in place, it changes everything. You move differently. You think differently. You interact differently. Because you're no longer operating from a need. That's where to be understood. You're operating from a standard of self-respect. And self-respect doesn't argue. It doesn't chase. It doesn't convince. It decides. It observes. It removes itself from anything that doesn't align. That's what makes emotional detachment so powerful. It's not emotional emptiness. It's emotional discipline. You still feel. You still understand. You still see. But you don't give those feelings to just anyone. You don't expose that understanding to people who misuse it. You don't. Offer that depth to those who only operate on the surface. Because depth is valuable. And anything valuable requires protection. That's what detachment becomes. Protection without aggression. Distance without explanation. Control without force. And once you reach that level, there's nothing left for others to manipulate. No reaction to trigger. No emotion to exploit. No access to misuse. Just a presence that is calm, aware, and completely out of reach. And that kind of presence, it doesn't need. That's where, to prove anything, it doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need validation. Because it knows exactly what it is and exactly what it refuses to become.